Welcome, welcome again, and we are continuing with the subject, the Leviticus of the Davidian Seventh-day Adventists, part 3. And this particular part, we will deal with what transpired after the death of V.T. Houteff. That's what we're going to be looking at. So we have gone through part 1. And we have also gone through part 2. And now, having gone through those 2 parts, we are continuing with part 3. We are going to say a word of prayer after we have read our prayer thought. And our prayer thought is taken from the book of Zechariah, chapter 13, verse 6 and 7. And it reads as follows. And one shall say unto him, What are these wounds in thine hands? Then he shall answer, Those with which I was wounded in the house of my friends. Awake, O sword, against my shepherd, and against the man that is my fellow, saith the Lord of hosts. Smite the shepherd, and the sheep shall be scattered, and I will turn mine hand upon the little ones. That is Zechariah chapter 13, verse 6 and 7. On that note, let us say a word of prayer. Father in heaven, your words cannot fail. Your shepherd was going to be smitten, but you did promise that you were going to turn your hands upon the little ones. As we are about to embark on studying history and your words, we pray that you will help us to understand clearly and that your presence will be with us. Through Jesus Christ's name we pray. Amen. Now, if you look at the screen, you will see this is a copy of the death certificate of Brother Houteff. He died on February the 5th, 1955, which was after sunset on a Friday. So he died on the 5th. This pretty much is his funeral day, the day he was buried, and this is just a picture of his casket. And that was what transpired back then. And it was a very solemn time, a surprising time, and also a confusing time for many. And if you so desire, you can go back and look at the death certificate, which is on the screen. He died from heart failure. And so you can just pause and go through the details. The information is right there on his death certificate for you to see. Now, in continuing with the subject, when we had looked at part 2, in dealing with the bylaws, we were on page 9, and it states the following. Article 1, Executive Council, Section 1. And we had point B. It, or the Executive Council, shall have full executive and administrative power between sessions of the association. So remember that we went through this and we had described what this means. It shall have full executive. And so we had discussed and showed before that once there is a session, the Executive Council has no power, because the power is now residing in the session itself. And whatever decision is made at the session, that's what's going to be carried out. So the Executive Council really exercise administrative and executive power when there's no session. But once a session is called, whatever decision is made, as we said at the session, that's going to be the mandate. Now, some members of the Executive Council might have positions before a session is called. But it's a possibility that at the session, some who had power could be shifted out of the position that they occupied and someone else might go into their position. So you find that the Executive Council can only have power between sessions. So the Executive Council have power. Once a session is called, they relinquish that power. After the session is done and whoever goes in office, the Executive Council have power again. So this is why it says they have power between session. And we had already gone through that. So upon the death of Brother Houtif, there was no president. And when Brother Houtif died also, many expected the vice president, Brother Wilson, would have been the one to occupy the position of president. Now, Brother Wilson was older than Brother Houtif. And by this, I mean, he was pretty old. But this is what transpired the day after Brother Houtif died. And the reason why we read about the Executive Council right here. Remember that the Executive Council can fill any office. The only position they cannot fill is the office of the president. But the Executive Council, having that power, can put anyone they want in any position, as I said, except the office of president. And we had gone through that in the second part of the study. Now we're at the third part. So the Executive Council now had tremendous power because the president was dead. Now, this was a letter addressed to the Executive Council on February 6, 1955. To the Executive Council, I am requesting by this letter that the Council convene for the purpose of considering and passing a resolution on the following requests made by V.T. Houtif before his death. So this is a letter that is addressed to the Executive Council that they should meet to consider, and not only consider, but to pass a resolution based on a request that Brother Houtif had made before his death. What were these requests that this letter was saying? And this letter was written by Florence Houtif, and it was given to the Executive Council, as I said, the day after Brother Houtif died. 1. That in case of V.T. Houtif's death, which would automatically leave vacant the office of President, Mrs. Florence Houtif be appointed to fill the office of Vice President. Now remember, the Executive Council can do this. Because there was no session called, they have full power to do this. 2. That someone be appointed to succeed Mrs. Florence Houtif as Secretary. 3. That T.O. Hermanson be appointed a member of the Executive Council. And this is Sister Florence Houtif's brother. So she is saying that Hermanson, her brother, should become a part of the Executive Council once she occupies the position of Vice President. She wants him to fill in. 4. That the Council make a resolution to provide for the welfare of Mrs. Florence Houtif as long as she lives. These are the 4 things. So she wrote and gave them that letter. They read the letter and they decided to have a meeting at 1:30 p.m. I don't know if when they got the first letter they had convened and read it, but they met at 1:30 p.m. The council was called to order. J.O. Conrad prayed for the success of the meeting and that the right decisions would be made. The secretary then read a letter attached from Mrs. Florence Houtif, which called the attention of the council to several requests made by V.T. Houghton before his death. After some discussion, it was moved by C. Hellman and seconded by A. Quackenbush that we endorse only requests 1 and 3 and delay the action on 2 and 4 until the next meeting possible to be held after V.T. Houghton's funeral. So they said they're going to vote on point 1. They said we endorse only request 1 and 3. So they endorsed it. The Executive Council accepted it. Point 1 and point 3. But point 2 and point 4, they said they'll wait and deal with those when Brother Houghton, after he's buried. What was the point they accepted? We continue with the letter. The requests above mentioned are as follows. 1. That in case of V.T. Houghton's death, which would automatically leave vacant the office of President, Mrs. Florence Houghton be appointed to fill the office of Vice President. So now, she officially at this point, by the Executive Council, replaced Brother Wilson, which was alive but old at the time, not at Mount Carmel, but away in a retirement. I mean, he was just an old man at the time. And they replaced him. So she is now the Vice President. And this they did based on what Florence Houghton told them. Brother Houghton told her. Point 3. That T.O. Hermanson be appointed a member of the Executive Council. So now they put her brother on. So those 2 points she got the council to sanction. And Mrs. Florence Houghton was appointed and elected, because according to her, she was appointed by Brother Houghton. They elected to the office of Vice President. So they pretty much, the Executive Council was saying they carried out what Brother Houghton wanted based on what Florence Houghton told them. Vice President of the General Association of Davidian Seventh-day Adventists. And T.O. Hermanson was appointed and elected to the Executive Council of said association. Regarding request 2, that someone be appointed to succeed Mrs. Florence Houghton as secretary, it was moved by J.O. Conrad that we ask Mrs. Houghton to recommend the person whom she would prefer to serve as secretary of the association. This motion was seconded by A. Quackenbush and was carried unanimously. A motion was then made, seconded, and carried to adjourn until 8 p.m. February the 7th. The meeting was dismissed by Quackenbush, and it tells you the persons that were present. So pretty much, she got the vice presidency. She got her brother to be put on the Executive Council. And she also, the point of someone replacing her as secretary, they turned that back over to her to decide who she would prefer to serve as the secretary. And the point about her getting financial assistance from the association as long as she should live, they decided to hold off on that until after the funeral. Now we continue. February the 6th at 8 p.m., the council was called to order and A. Quackenbush prayed for God's wisdom. The first item of business was to act upon request number 2, to wit, that someone be appointed to succeed Mrs. Florence Houghton as secretary. In the previous meeting held at 1:30 p.m., it was decided to postpone decision on this item until Mrs. Florence Houghton had been consulted in regard to her preference, if any, for the one who should be appointed to fill this vacancy in accordance with the Leviticus of Davidian Seventh-day Adventists, page 9, Bylaws, Article 1, Section 1, point C. Now what does it state? We have it under the red line. Bylaws, Article 1, Executive Council, Section 1, C. This is what they were referring to. It shall be vested with authority to grant credentials and licenses and to fill vacancies that may occur in any of the association's offices, save the office of president. And they quoted that. That's what they were talking. They had the authority to fill any position. And remember, the only time the Executive Council does not have power is during sessions. And there was no sessions. So they had power to make decisions. The Executive Council at this point appointed Florence Houteff as the Vice President and removed Elder Wilson, who was the Vice President. They also appointed Florence Houteff brother on the Executive Council. And now they're going to make a decision to see who should be the secretary. And they quoted the Leviticus, the section of bylaws that they, the Executive Council, have the authority based on the book, the Leviticus, to do these things. We continue. She sent the following suggestion. She states, and we quote, I think the new secretary should be a man, and he should be from among the members of the Executive Council. I would prefer either M.W. Wolf or J.O. Conrad to fill this position. Unquote. The vote was taken by secret ballot, and the result was a tie. The chairman then cast his vote for J.O. Conrad. Thus, J.O. Conrad was selected to serve as a new secretary of the General Association of Davidian Seventh-day Adventists. And this is the General Association. That's the name of the association. It was then decided by a vote of the members to complete the remainder of the business on hand, namely the consideration of request 4. So they had said firstly, earlier, that they weren't going to take up point 4 until after the burial of Brother Houteff. But since they had met, now they said, listen, Brother Houteff died the 5th, and now is just a few hours, several hours after his death. They said, let us just deal with point 4. 4. That the council make a resolution to provide for the welfare of Mrs. Florence Houteff as long as she lives. After a very lengthy discussion, the following motion was made by C.W. Hellman. I move that we, the General Association of Davidian Seventh-day Adventists, guarantee to Mrs. Florence Houteff all the conveniences and necessary requirements for her to properly discharge her duties as Vice President of the Association, and at all times she will be provided with everything necessary to minister to her comfort and well-being according to the principles of the Shepherd's Rod message as long as she lives. This is now the minutes of what's being discussed and what they came to, the resolution. We continue. 2. Minutes of the meeting of the Executive Council continued. The motion was seconded and carried by unanimous vote. It was further stipulated that the action on request 4 be first submitted. So whatever the council decided, they said it should be first submitted to Mrs. Florence Houteff for her consideration. And so she has to look and see if she likes the terms that they're going to provide for her for. She has to look at it first and then be taken to the association's attorney for his legal advice. He will be instructed to prepare the proper instruments or documents covering the decisions reached during the 2 council meetings of this day. Members present, and it gives who the assistant chairman was and all the different names of the people. So we see what transpired. And this is just shortly after Brother Houghtif's death, and all 4 of her requests was granted to her. All 4. And this she told them based on what she said, Brother Houghtif said, and they just went along with it. We continue. On May the 7th, 1955, the Executive Council called a meeting. The meeting was called to order by the chairman, and Brother Quackenbush and Brother Wolf were asked to pray for a true meaning of the work of the council and the association. Brother Wolf stated, so by this, Brother Houghtif died February, and you have March, April, now we're in May. So after a time, some started to really think about all that they had given Mrs. Florence Houghtif. So Brother Wolf asked the question, how can we prove that the president, this was Brother Houghtif, appointed you to be vice president? That's what Brother Wolf asked her in the meeting. Answer, I cannot prove it. I have nothing in writing. But since Brother Houghtif did not appoint anyone else, you are going to have to believe me when I tell you that he appointed me. Now, she continues, I would like to ask you a question. How can you prove that you are a member of the Executive Council? So she's asking him, how can he prove that he even belong here as a member of the Executive Council? Much as to be asking her this question. She's asking him, he should prove to them then that he's a member of the Executive Council. Why did she ask him that? It continues. It developed that some of the members had received written notice, and this is from Brother Houghtif, you know, that they were to serve as members of the council for a limited time only, and that time limit had expired years ago. So what Florence said, yes, some of you are here and you were put on the Executive Council. That's so true. But Brother Houghtif had written a letter to them. She reminded them that they were going to be taken off. And the time that he gave them that they should be taken off had expired years ago. So by right, she's saying, you don't have even any word, Brother Wolf, to show that you should be even here talking. No. If you look before you in volume 3 of the Symbolic Code number 2 on page 4, to your left, in 1937, this was the Executive Council. V.T. Houghtif, which was the president, M.L. Dieter, my brother Dieter died in 1944, E.T. Wilson, M.J. Bingham, H.G. Warden, Mrs. S. Ermanson, G.E. Merrill, John Berlinger, Mrs. V.T. Houghtif. Now, in 1937, these are the members that was listed and went into the field that was on the Executive Council. Now, in the book Fundamental Beliefs, page 16, in 1943, Brother Houghtif updated the Executive Council. So we have V.T. Houghtif, which is the president. M.L. Dieter had died in 1944, so he is off. We have E.T. Wilson, and Brother Wilson eventually died January 15, 1959. So when Brother Houghtif died in 1955, Brother Wilson only had a few years left to live, and he was even older than Brother Houghtif. In 1943, we see Brother M.J. Bingham came back over on the Executive Council again. H.G. Warden came over again. Mrs. Ermanson came over again. J.E. Merrill was taken off, and John Berlinger was taken off. And we have now Mrs. G.R. Bingham was added, and Mrs. Florence Houghtiff is on it too. This executive council in 1943, Brother Houghtiff never changed it. The Lord didn't allow him to touch it. It just left the same. So when Florence asks the question right here from Wolf, there's nothing you can even prove that you belong on any executive council. Then there's nothing Wolf could say, because Brother Houghtiff had written to them to tell most of these people that they were going to be taken off. What he was going to do, he didn't tell them. But all I know, the Lord allowed him to leave the 1943 list as it was. So when Brother Houghtiff died, the only information the people had in the field, as far as published in the rod, in the golden bowl, was Brother Houghtiff himself, Brother Wilson, Brother Bingham, Brother Warden, Mrs. Hermanson, Mrs. G.R. Bingham, and Mrs. F.M. Houghtiff. That was it. No. So Wolf had to just keep quiet. Now we had read this list in part 2, and we're going to come back to it a bit as we progress. Now, in 1957, something interesting transpired. Most of all Mount Carmel was pretty much sold off because Brother Houghtiff himself had started to sell off the property before he died, and they had continued with the work of selling the property. So this is a letter that went to the field in 1957, November 24th to be exact. It is dated right there. And all the documents that we're reading is just historical documents from our archive, and this is one of them. Dear fellow Davidians, a special meeting was called in the Mount Carmel Chapel the evening of November 19th, so that information concerning the latest developments in God's work might be given to the Davidians here. This same information we now wish to pass on to you. But before doing so, we would like to quote for you the same paragraphs which were first read in the prayer meeting here. And we just remove a lot of the prayer thoughts and readings for time's sake. We continue. Since our command now is still to go forward, I'm sure none of us want to lag behind and refuse to go ahead, just because the way before us may not seem clear to all. The Lord has given his pledge that he will open a path for us as we move on by faith. For some time, we have been considering the fact that the time will soon be here when the remainder of the property here at Mount Carmel, approximately 11 acres, so that was left, 11 acres of the original Mount Carmel was left, will have to be sold, as well as the other two institutions which operate under the auspices of this association, the Davidian Seventh-day Adventist Rest Home at Salem, South Carolina, and Hillview Home at Yonder, Wyoming, both of which are now taking care of our elderly Davidian folks. As we all did sense keenly the imminence of this event, we were awaiting God's leading in this important matter. It had been the general opinion among us that when we should approach the situation we now find ourselves in, we would perhaps look for small acreage, just enough to accommodate the barest need of the work. But the real estate agent contacted us in the interest of selling us a large farm for a man who had in recent months undergone brain surgery and had been urged by his physician to sell his property at once because of his health. Therefore, he set his price low in order to sell the property immediately for cash. So what is being discussed here? It is now going in the field in 1957 that all Mount Carmel property is going to be sold off, and that it was 11 acres that was left. Not only was Old Mount Carmel going to be sold, but the retirement home that they had old Davidians in, those properties were also going to be sold. We continue. After several trips to the farm and many hours spent together in prayer and in consideration of the matter, the executive council was convinced that the Lord wanted us to sell the present Mount Carmel and Salem rest homes and advised the operator of the yonder rest home to sell that property, and that we should purchase where the personnel and the activities of all three places can be consolidated into one operating unit. Therefore, acting in the fear of the Lord and under the command to go forward, this farm was purchased, and the three properties were immediately put up for sale. And the three properties was the old Mount Carmel, the 11 acres that was left, and the 2 retirement or rest homes. Below are some of the underlying reasons which form the basis for our decision. In the first place, at the price this farm, which consists of 941 acres, was offered to us, less actual cash will be invested in this one place than is tied up in all 3 of the present locations put together, even though the acreage of the farm exceeds the amount of these 3 locations put together. Thus we will have more land for less money, and we will have the property holdings consolidated into one location, which will be much easier to be disposed of when the time comes for our last move than 3 locations would be. So what they're saying, they want to have the headquarters and the retired people all in one place. Also in favor of the location of the farm is that it is situated in the country, approximately 13 miles east of downtown Waco. Whereas our present location, or where they are, Old Mount Carmel, the present location, is now within the city limits and is being surrounded by the homes of the Gentiles. There are several advantages of being in the country, not the least of which is peace and privacy. Also, there will be no city taxes to pay, which currently is one of our large expenses, amounting to several thousands of dollars annually. Furthermore, the Lord's command to his people is to come out of the cities, and Mount Carmel would be in no position to tell others to come out of the cities into the country if it were in the city itself. We continue. And the last but not least factor, we do not know that the Lord will not call a solemn assembly, Joel 2 verse 15 to 17, before his people are taken to Palestine. And if such a thing should come to pass, there of course would be no place for such an event to be held here, that is at the 11 acres Old Mount Carmel, nor is there privacy. She said there's no privacy at the Old Mount Carmel place. It is surrounded by city and Gentiles now. The farm, though, has several places in its natural state which could easily be used as amphitheaters, better places for such an assembly than this Mount Carmel ever afforded. You will notice that we refer to this Mount Carmel. The reason, quite simple, is that Mount Carmel will not be a thing of the past with the selling of this location, or the remainder of the old Mount Carmel, for the property will also go by Mount Carmel. And so Davidian started to call the new property they're about to buy New Carmel, and where Brother Houtif was, they call it Old Carmel, to distinguish between the two. And it will still have the same mailing address, Mount Carmel Center, Waco, Texas. You see, Mount Carmel will only be moving from one piece of land to another. We also will continue to have a telephone number with a Waco exchange number, and not for a description of the farm itself. As we have mentioned before, the acreage totals 941 acres. A country road runs through the middle of the property. On one side is 1 3/4 miles long, and on the other side 1 1/4 miles, which forms a natural dividing line should we wish to sell half the property as suggested previously. A total of 392 acres are under cultivation at the present time. 30 acres are in timber and the rest is in pasture, although most of it too could be cultivated if desired. A portion of the cultivated area, 130 acres of it, is very good bottom land along a creek. The timberland is along the creek also. There are 7 stock tanks on the property, which actually are lakes or ponds formed by dams constructed in the natural terrain of the land. 2 houses are already on the land. One is a nice home the present occupants built within the past few years, and the other is an older farmhouse. In addition, there are several farm buildings for livestock, machinery, etc. We continue. At present, we do not know how long it will be before the farm is ready for us to occupy, for there is much hard ahead to be done, as housing for the office and publishing department and workers must be provided. Much planning and close figuring will also have to be done. But we are confident of the Lord's leading, and we know that with the help and support of each one of us, everything will work out according to God's time schedule. In closing, we wish to ask each of you in the field to unite with us in prayer to the end that each of us will follow the Lord's leading in our own lives and in the work as a whole, and that we might all be faithful to the end and receive the commendation, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant." Sincerely yours, to hasten the glad day when the work will be completed, Mrs. V.T. Houghtiff. No, that was what was about to transpire. And the 11 acres of the old Mount Carmel that was left, that was about to be sold off, along with the 2 rest homes with the older Davidians who were there, were going to have to move to New Mount Carmel on this 941 acre property. At that time, Brother Bingham, in the Timely Truth Educators in the 1950s, was defending the shepherd's rod message. All this that Florence was doing and the executive council, it was not the fault of the rod. And at the same time, warning Florence Houghtiff and her council that they were going to fail. In 1958, this symbolic code, volume 14, number 1, November edition, came out in the field. And the purpose of this was to deal with the prophecy of the 42 months of Revelation 11, and to also talk about the radio program that they had started to evangelize and to spread the message wide to everyone in the world. So by this, they had started to deal heavily, the Executive Council and Florence at this time, to push the point that the work essentially for the Seventh-day Adventist Church was going to be wrapped up pretty much in 1959. And this is one of the things that the Timely Truth Educator was bringing out, the point that these ideas and all these things that was going on now, new prophecies that was coming out from the Executive Council, were false prophecies and false predictions. So this, as you can see, is the wardens in the 1950s. And you can see missionaries in the 1950s also going out to spread as far as wide to anyone who would give an ear to the message. And at this time, Brother Warden was a minister working along with the program of the Executive Council and Florence Houghtiff. And these are just some old pictures of what was taking place at that particular point in time. This also to your left is a publication that appeared in the Cleveland Press and it was advertised by Davidians, advertising their meetings in 1958. And these are now articles that was published in the public press. Here the Shepherd Rod presents Bible Prophecy Revealed the Destiny of Nations, and it gives you the time, 10 a.m. to 3 p.m., and then it goes to 7:30 p.m. June the 19th to the 28th, and admission is free. And this was an assembly hall in a hotel, Allenden. This is a hotel that they rented. And this is some copy of Shepherd Rod publication series. And it shows you Davidian representatives traveling throughout the United States and to other countries, personally contacting many thousands of Seventh-day Adventists to spread the message. Now, the Executive Council met again, and this time this meeting was held 2 p.m. March 26, 1959. What was this meeting about? Let us just read some of the things. The meeting was called to order. Before prayer was offered, the discussion centered about the contemplated meeting of a solemn assembly and the possible attitude of the believers in the field. So by this now, they were talking about calling a solemn assembly and what the believers in the field were going to think. If the Davidians everywhere were studying the message and the prophecies that they should know as much as the office as published in regards to the events which will transpire in the immediate future. So they were putting out prophecies that was going to transpire in the immediate future. Should they be brought up to date on what the present study of the council on the subject of the Passover in relation to the 1,260 days as brought to light? Question. The chairman announced that the council would have a season of prayer later in the council meeting. Dudley Goff prayed the council might know about the solemn assembly. So you see, all this stuff is coming out. I thought the idea of a solemn assembly, what the people in the field would think about this information that is coming out. And at the same time, the Time the Truth Educator series is warning not only the council but the Davidians that all this stuff that Florence Houteff and her council is going on with is anti-Rod. It's not according to the Rod message. Firstly, they're even addressing the vice president as the chairman. So show you that in a short period of time they had gone from the message. We continue. The council now set about to determine the exact date for the commencement of the 1,260 days of Revelation 11. It was in October of 1955 that the code article of the 1,260 days was written. It was thought that this might be the beginning of the time. The records were gotten out, and the mailing of the November code occurred November 9th, 1955. With this date as a starting point and counting 1,260 days, the period ends April 22nd, 1959. So what they're saying, the first time after Brother Houteff had died, then they started to look at the prophecy in Revelation 11 and had sent out a symbolic code after Brother Houteff died about the subject. They went for the book and found that they had sent out this code on November 9th. And they started to do some calculation, and based on their calculation, they ended up April 22nd, 1959. This was all man-made concoction. This coincides with the time of the Passover in 1959. If there is any real significance to this, it is at least very remarkable. Incidentally, on December 3rd, 1955, the first public sermon was given on the 1,260 days of Revelation 11 by T. Ho Hermanson, which is Florence Houteff brother. God-given signs in the Bible, and it was thought that the council perhaps ought to pray for a sign, a threat that what is predicted will actually take place. In the prayer meeting, G.W. Sater, T.O. Hermanson, Dudley Goff, J.O. Conrad, J.R. Custer, and Mrs. Florence Houteff all prayed that God would make plain when the announcement of the solemn assembly should be called. The meeting closed 6:15 p.m. So you see what was happening? By this, Florence Houteff had realized that many in the association had started to question her ascension to power. Some was even seen other people were questioning all these crazy stuff that she was doing, and the council. But the membership could not have any say, because the membership could only have say if there's a session. And they didn't want to call any session, because if they did call a session, the membership was going to make revolutionary moves at the session. So, no session, the council had the power. We continue. On March the 30th, 1959, at 9 a.m., after the meeting was called to order, the chairman asked the council whether it would call the people to assemble at Mount Carmel by April 17, 1959. This was New Mount Carmel now. In view of our understanding of the ending events in Revelation 11 verse 1 to 13 in relation to Passover time, J.O. Conrad and G.W. Sater prayed. Question to be decided was, should the people be invited to come to Mount Carmel, April the 17th, so that they would be here before the Sabbath and be here at the termination of the 1260 days? If these events take place, as it appears that they will, it was thought that all Davidians would want to be here before the events take place. If any delayed, it might be very difficult to get here after the trouble started, because they were thinking if people didn't come at the solemn assembly, there's going to be a time of trouble such as never was. And Ezekiel 9 was going to happen shortly after that. And all kind of World War, all things were just going to start to happen. This was 1959, you know. And they were thinking to call the solemn assembly and the people should be there before April 17th. So we're in March 30th. By this time, you know what faithful and sensible Davidians are telling them? That this thing cannot happen. G.W. Sater now moved that a resolution be drawn up that all Davidians in this country assemble on Mount Carmel Center, Waco, Texas, on or before April 16, 1959, and that all Davidians in foreign countries be notified of this meeting, and that they also hold themselves in readiness where they are to get their deliverance from the Assyrian yoke. That these announcements be sent out as soon as possible. There was a second to this by J.O. Conrad, and all were in favor of it. The meeting closed after 9.5 hours at 6:30 p.m. T.O. Hermanson offered closing prayer. In addition to her doctrinal falsehoods, this is Florence Houteff's administration systematically remove all of the cash and the cash assets, second tithe account for example, from the association, either by her expensive failures, national radio program, and through large wage adjustments to herself. You know, she had gotten to be taken care of for the rest of her life. She had also made big salary increase for herself and many others, her relatives and her close associates at Carmel. Brother Sater and others sources told what started to transpire. And you can see there on the public transportation, the bus, there were shepherd rod notifications on billboards and cars. Many thousands of dollars were being expended. Because at this point in time, they believed that they're going to go in the kingdom within a few weeks. Ezekiel 9 was going to be in a few weeks. World War III was going to be completed in a few weeks. All these things were going on, and there was no supporting evidence from the rod. You see meetings and publications and billboards all over the country, radio announcement, but you know eventually what was going to happen? It was all going to come crashing down. We continue. On April the 10th, 1959, a letter was sent into the field. This was a letter. Dear Davidians, our hearts are filled with joy and earnestness as we announce that we have called the American and Canadian believers to the necessary preliminary sessions beginning April 16th. This is now the solemn assembly they're calling them to come to. That will precede the solemn assembly. So they're gathering before the solemn assembly, but they're thinking the solemn assembly or the closing off period is going to be very shortly, and they're telling Davidians that they have to come. We are calling Davidians from these countries only because this is where the headquarters of the Seventh-day Adventists and Davidian Seventh-day Adventist churches are. Also, we have not seen that it is necessary to call Davidians from other places because it would be taking you away from the direction you would take to the homeland. We are hastening these lines to remind you that you should be readying yourselves for the time of your deliverance, as we believe you will be delivered right where you are and taken from your country to the promised land for the great gathering. Needless to say, we have been very busy with all the preparations for the meetings and our other duties. But we want you to know that we will be remembering you in our prayers as we gather in our preliminary sessions. Sincerely yours, to stand at last with the Lamb at Mount Zion, Mrs. V.T. Houtif. Now this was deception of the highest order. Now, we're going to show you a video clip of what was transpiring because the news reporters at the day had gotten wind that some people are gathering to expect deliverance to go to the promised land. And not only deliverance to go to the promised land, but the soon execution of Ezekiel 9 on the Seventh-day Adventist Church very shortly.
At Mount Carmel Center, 941 acres of farmland, 15 miles northeast of Waco, some 600 members of a religious group which called itself the Davidians. Some 600 members of a religious group which called itself the Davidians gathered to pray for the events which they said would lead to the second coming of Christ. From all over the United States and parts of Canada, Davidians were flocking to this, the organization's world headquarters. Many sold most of their possessions and were making new homes in tents while they met and prayed for the fulfillment of biblical prophecies which would bring about the establishment of God's kingdom in Jerusalem following a war of all nations in the Holy Land. Davidians expected the war to break out in the Middle East within a few weeks. The Davidians, who had been rebuked by the Seventh-day Adventist Church from which they sprang, planned to go to Jerusalem following the war to prepare for the second coming of the Lord. Officials of the group tabbed as erroneous newspaper stories which said Davidians believed the war they were expecting would bring about the end of the world. Davidian pastor Dudley Goff explained the group's beliefs to Texas News cameraman Floyd Bright.
We feel that world conditions are such, in line with prophecy, that all nations are soon to gather against Jerusalem to battle. In fact, we expect that to be this spring. And according to the prophecy of Zechariah 14 and verse 2, the Lord says there that he's going to gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle. And the purpose in his gathering all nations there to battle is that he might prepare the land so that he can set up his kingdom, so that his people might return there and set up his kingdom in compliance or in fulfillment of the prophecy of Daniel 2:44, where the Lord says he's going to set up his kingdom down in the last days. That particular prophecy is brought out on this small chart that I have here that pictures the great image of Daniel 2, which was smote by this stone upon his feet, which Daniel said breaks the image to pieces. And Daniel said that this stone is God's kingdom that is set up in the days of these kings that are represented by the toes. Now, Daniel also told us that this stone grew into a great mountain. In other words, this stone is just the nucleus of God's kingdom to begin with. And then it begins to grow, and he says it becomes a great mountain, and it fills the entire earth. Now, that is the thing that we're expecting to come about very soon, and the beginning of it is this war in Palestine that results in the clearing of the land for God's people to go there.
Let's go back to Brother.
Now, quickly, in looking at this list, you see the list? This list consists of the names. The following persons were named to serve as ministers and priests. And this was held in the office. And this is minutes of the meeting of the Executive Council of General Association of Davidian Seventh-day Adventists, held in the office of the Vice President. And this is April the 22nd, 1959. The meeting was called to order, and J.O. Conrad, J.R. Cluster, T.O. Hermanson, G.W. Sater prayed for wisdom and understanding. The discussion centered on Joel chapter 2 verse 15 to 17, Isaiah 62 verse 6 and 7. These texts predict that the church would pray for the deliverance of his people, that the church is to give the Lord no rest until he works for the setting up of the kingdom. Thus it is imperative that the people, and especially the ministry, pray most earnestly and ceaselessly. The following persons were named to serve as ministers and priests. And you see the first name there, H.G. Warden, Hellman. And all these individuals were there as ministers, praying for the solemn assembly to come and for God to deliver his people. And at the same time, some Davidians were warning that all this thing could not come to pass. It was not the Rod's message. None of these false predictions and these time setting that they were doing had anything to do with the message. And they had put the message on the altar, pretty much saying if these events didn't come to pass, the Rod was not true. Now, in looking at this situation, this is Dudley Goff, some years after, reflecting on what had transpired with the failed prophecy and predictions. Dudley Goff spoke of what took place after the 1959 failed prophetic prediction and how he eventually left the message. Goff further stated that Brother M.J. Bingham was not there as part of Mrs. Florence Houghton on her council's false actions.
1,260 days and so forth. So it sounds like you're still holding on, and yet everybody thought that it was going to happen.
So much so that when some of the brethren there were pushing me to continue the 11th hour call, my response to them was, we don't have a message. I have nothing to talk about. I have nothing to tell anybody. We said these events would take place, and by this time they didn't happen. I don't know what's wrong, but we're wrong.
You're back to the drawing board.
I'm back to the drawing board, and it was devastating enough to me that I didn't want anything to do with any of it. And it maybe took a few weeks for this to solidify and everything. Like you said, there's a little bit of flexibility. But it soon came to the point where then, and Mount Carmel had no more job for me because we stopped the 11th hour call. That was very costly on the APC network,
it's already 12 o'clock. Yeah, the
Right.
11th hour call.
That's right, yeah. So there was no reason for me to stay, so then we did start looking for another job. Well, here I'd already gotten into radio with the 11th hour call, so I did make
The other way.
application as one of the other students to go into secular radio, and I got hired at Marlin radio station there, and I won't go into all that story, but it finally resulted in then I leaving Texas in 1961, moving to Astoria, Oregon, where I was offered a job there.
So you recognize that the way you took the disappointment of 1959 was that you humbly said that we've made a mistake. I'm wrong.
Right, yeah.
Now, that's rare, you know,
Yeah.
in human
But
experience.
it was based on Brother Hardeff's writings, but if Brother Hardef, if we're wrong on that, then he was not a true prophet. He was not the Elijah. But if wrong there, Ellen G. White was not a prophet.
Yeah.
We're wrong there. How far do you extrapolate this down to the point where you say, I don't want anything to do with this Bible even. There's nothing there.
Sure.
Well, at some point, God is saying, wait a minute, kid. You know, and I had to rethink. But it was so far
Sure.
a stretch that this is the Bible I used. I bought this in 1950 from Baylor University bookstore. This is the Bible I used all the time. All my markings and everything are the Davidian Bible studies and everything. I couldn't read this Bible anymore.
Sure.
It just it told him too much else. So I put it away.
Right.
I really wasn't reading anything until I finally got the Living Bible, which is just a paraphrase, and started reading it some. But
get
I
the
mean, I
general
just
message.
about gave up my faith.
You had to
You know.
rehabilitate.
I really had to, yeah.
Now, Florence didn't stay either, but, and you said you kept a relationship.
You kept
with her.
a relationship,
She was kind
yeah.
of the leader.
Yeah, and
Now-
and her brother too.
Could you tell us,
Oliver
though,
Hermanson.
you know, we got to talk to you a little bit before the interview, and you told us this amazing story where the Seventh-day Adventist Church reached out to you, and I think Florence and several of the leading people went to, is D.C. the
They
headquarters?
did Washington D.C.
Tell us a
Yeah.
little, because that needs to be told, too.
Now, that's an amazing
Yeah.
story,
Yeah.
too.
Before you do that, read that letter before the disappointment where they're denouncing you. Just you want me to
Okay.
read
Give us
it?
a little
Yeah.
context
Yeah,
on
I'll
that.
You know,
I'll let you read it.
Dudley, after the disappointment, you know, as you said, you left, Florence left. And I know when you were going out before on these missionary teaching journeys, you personally, you showed us this letter, which is amazing. Now, this would be 51. I'm going back a little to show the
Yeah,
contrast.
okay.
But the Adventist church, the mother church, is getting very worried. Here's a letter from the president of the conference in Montana. That'd be the whole state.
Right, yeah.
It starts out, Dear brethren, to the Adventists, beware. The shepherd rod people are trying to get a foothold among our people in Montana. They sneak into the town and innocently ask who the church clerk is and get names and addresses. The one who's working most actively in Montana is Dudley Goff. Okay, so fast forward, 1951, they're warning against you and all these people. And now you're disappointed. The whole world is crashed. Almost like the Millerite thing.
Yeah, right.
You know, they said we wept till dawn and all these.
It was such a
But
contrast.
they didn't react like this.
No, not
So
at all.
explain
Tell us what
Yeah.
happened.
What happened?
See, there was such a contrast between the way they acted after our disappointment in '59 and
This, yeah.
prior to that, but also when Brother Harder first was meeting with them as a group with his message to begin with, they were very good, very understanding, very kind, and all of that. That changed
They're
when
getting
he
worried.
didn't
They're
recant.
getting
They were
worried.
getting worried.
Yeah.
And so we were a thorn in their side
For years.
for all those years. So the difference between the beginning, the way they treated us, and during, and then the end, back to the, treating us decently, it was, they understood because they were birthed out of the Millerite movement, a disappointment
Okay.
that birthed the Seventh-day Adventist Church with Ellen G. White and A.G. Daniels and all of them, you know, and Mr. White, Brother White there. So they knew the disappointment that we had gone through, and they understood, and they came to us real heartfelt.
So
It
they
wasn't.
had compassion.
It was real compassion. It wasn't a con job or anything like that. They really came to us and they wanted to help us understand. So much so, they put the money where their mouth was and invited us to Washington, D.C., to the headquarters of the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists.
Worldwide headquarters.
Worldwide headquarters, and leading theologians, Adventist theologians there to meet with our people, so that, and giving us an opportunity to expound to them our teachings, and them an opportunity to point out where we were wrong, made our mistake that resulted in such a horrendous disappointment in a failed prediction. So they were unbelievable.
And they're welcome. They want you to come back, of course.
Absolutely, and they were just super. And I was one of them there, and along with Florence and her brother and Merritt Wolf and 3 or 4 others there, you know. And I gave a good number of the sermons to them because that's what I had been doing. Bingham was not involved then in that aspect of it, but anyway.
How did you feel representing it when you were beginning to doubt that maybe it's even true? You just wanted to sort it out, I guess. Yeah.
That was what it really was. So we're presenting what we've been presenting all the time. Tell us where we're wrong.
Yeah,
Okay.
because it still made sense to you
Well, sure, yeah.
chronologically
It just hadn't
and prophetically.
It just hadn't
But
happened.
It just had not happened.
Right, yeah.
So you were in a state of confusion.
This is right, yeah. And they couldn't help us.
Yeah.
And when it finally was over with, it hadn't changed anything of what we'd been teaching, but we were wrong.
Ah,
You know.
yeah.
Well, if that's the case, then I guess I don't want any part of any of it.
Yeah.
You know.
So here we see Dudley Gough spoke of what took place in the dialogues with the SDA General Conference leaders, and he also mentioned in that clip that Brother Bingham was not there as part of those meetings. And Brother Bingham was not there for right, because he was telling them for years that they were going to be wrong, that their prediction was false and it could not be accomplished. And so here Dudley Gough, who was still alive at the time of this presentation, was looking back and reflecting on all the things that transpired and the failure. Now, on June the 22nd, 1959, a meeting was held, and this is minutes of the Executive Council. This is 10 a.m. on June the 22nd. It says the meeting was called to order, and then the visiting ministers were introduced to the council members. So this now, the Seventh-day Adventist Church had sent ministers to dialogue with the Davidian Executive Council and to try to show them where they had gone wrong, if they could, and to have some dialogue to see if they could come to some conclusion or to get people to come back to the church. They were Elder Leach, president of the Texas Conference, Elder A.V. Olson, formerly a vice president of the General Conference, now on the General Conference Committee, and also the president of the Ellen G. White Writings, Elder L.C. Evans, president of the Southwestern Conference, Elder R.L. Wenders, pastor of the Waco Church. So these were several influential people that came and they wanted to speak to see if they could get the people to come back. The chairman asked Elder Olson and Jack Nipple to pray for the Lord's guidance in the meetings. Then she asked who was their spokesman. This is Florence, who they, and by this is acknowledged, they're referring to her as the chairman. So she had presidential power, because all this stuff was Florence Houteff doing. And the council just went along with her because she was actually acting presidential. So while she would not give MJ Bingham a chance to explain where they had gone wrong, they opened the place to the General Conference men. Elder Olson said that he would be spokesman for them. Then the chairman, Sister Houghton, asked them what it was they desired to see us about, that we had invited them out when we learned that they had come to Waco in the interest of Davidians. Meeting was thrown open. Mrs. Outif, she asked, we want to know what is the truth on these things. Elder Olson, there is no reason other than that you all recognize error. Mrs. Outif, what we need to know is why the Confederacy which we expected did not come. Elder Olson, I am not acquainted with the Shepherd's Rod doctrine. I have read some of your literature, but in Europe, where I was when these doctrines were being taught in America, I did not have to meet with it so much there. Elder Heavens, if this proves anything at all, it proves that you should have stayed with the church and not gone off with this teaching and predictions. The ministers were offered the privilege to come out in the tabernacle and see if they could help us out, for we had heard that they wanted to come. So they were being invited to go in the tabernacle or the chapel and to explain to the brethren, because by this there was a lot of confusion. The prediction had failed, people had given up everything, and the General Conference men came in and they were looking for them now, the General Conference men, to help them. Elder Weiner said that they appreciated this offer very much. Elder Olson, do you believe that Sister White was inspired? He asked. All the council affirmed that was their position. Then he asked, what position did the council want to be taken up? And this ended, and this was approved February 17th, 1960. I mean, approved means stamped and filed away then. Just showing you what had transpired before. So we should be clear as to all the going-ons that was taking place. And these historical documents captured what had occurred when the prediction failed, and now the General Conference officers came in. But in June, in the Timely Truth Educator, number 4, page 2, paragraph 10, June to September, this is what Brother Bingham had written in 1960. Brother Bingham made a prediction of his own in the Timely Truth Educators. He said, and he was telling faithful Davidians this, Constitutional Association is coming. He's saying all this craziness that you see going on with these people, it's not going to stop God's work. Constitutional Association is coming. Make certain of that. Davidian delegates worldwide will at the signal time in God's providence bring corporate association into being for the finishing of the work. He goes on. The tragedy is that case-hardened, die-hard retainers of the vested interests of the new Carmel hierarchy will wither and languish on the dying vine on which they have chosen to cling. What he's saying, they're not going to change. They don't want the truth. They don't want to listen. They have gotten power. They have gotten the money. They have gotten control. And now they're in dialogue with the big wigs of the General Conference. They're riding high. And they're not going to humble themselves. Dudley Goff and many others eventually rejected the Shepherd Rod message and Sister White's writings. Goff himself later started attending a Sunday church. He said that many Davidians lost their faith and gave up everything, and then went into various directions.
Well, you know, I could not reject all the way to the Bible. I could reject Brother Harniff. I could reject the council, Florence, you know, everything we believed as Davidians. I could reject Ellen G. White. But when it come all the way down to the source of their teachings, I couldn't reject this.
Right.
So God stopped me there.
Yeah.
I could have become an atheist and not believe in anything, say, and believe this is just a nothing, and I couldn't come to that. So something held me, at least, there. But what? Where do I go now? What do I do now? So I'm going to church on Sunday? Sunday churches, which I was doing. I sang in a 65-member choir for 10 years in a Sunday keeping church. It fed my ego pretty good, but it didn't do anything else. Theologically,
Sure.
Everybody
I'm
went
limbo.
different ways.
Yeah.
I know you said some people went to Herbert Armstrong's group, the Worldwide
Right.
Church
My
of
mother
God,
and my brother did,
and
yeah.
others probably.
My dad went back to Adventist church.
Right.
Yeah, some went back, some fell away from any kind of.
So this is what we saw. As Gus stated, he went to a Sunday church and was starting to sing in a choir, was there for years. Some went to the Worldwide Church of God, some went back to the Adventist church, some left and went. Florence just left and went out in the world pretty much. So Goff, as he stated, and numerous other Davidians rejected the rod message, rejected Sister White's writings. And they were right there with Florence right to the end. Even Brother Warden himself too. Now, this letter was written March 1st, 1962, and it's a notice of resignation. It states, to the chairman and fellow members attending the second special session of the General Association of Davidian Seventh-day Adventists, and this, they're saying anybody that wanted to come, they have a special announcement to make, and they call it a special session. What was this about? For many years, we of the Executive Council have wholeheartedly accepted and taught the teachings of the Shepherd's Rod, literature, the foundation upon which this organization was built. In 1955, at the death of V.T. Houghtiff, the administration of this association fell completely into the hands of the Executive Council and the association's remaining officers. Due to the many inaccuracies that we found in the teachings concerning these chapters in Ezekiel and others that we have not discussed publicly, we must frankly state that we no longer are convinced that the Shepherd's Rod is without error and consequential doctrines. Neither are we convinced that our final authority in spiritual matters reside in the writings of Mrs. E.G. White, from which the Shepherd's Rod draw its conclusions on Ezekiel 9 and other doctrines and practices. It is our belief that the teachings of both Brother Houghtiff and Sister White have been used improperly in relation to the Bible, in that the Bible has been made subject to what they have said. In a time like this, we can ill afford to look only to the past. We must also look from the present into the future. As for ourselves, we are glad we can say that since our path of experience has brought us to a closer relation to God, and a better understanding of the Bible than we have ever before had, we believe God has led us. Yet we have much more to learn. But as we conform our thinking more and more to what the Bible teaches, we are confident that our understanding will proportionately increase. And so, as we tender this, our resignation, we leave ourselves in the hands of God and trust in Him for the future. This resignation is made by the following named persons from the position which also are specified from the Executive Council, and the name is there. So pretty much they call this special session not to give anyone any power, but for them to resign and jump ship and state that the Shepherd Rod message is error, Brother Houghtiff was not a true prophet, and Sister White is not a true prophet. And they're just gone. And they sign their names. Our resignation takes effect immediately at the reading of it in the second special session of the Davidian Seventh-day Adventists convened at Mount Carmel Center beginning March 11th, 1962, and they put their signatures there. And this is what Brother Bingham had stated from even 1960, highlighted in red. The tragedy is that the case hardened, die-hard retainers of the vested interests of the new Carmel hierarchy will wither and languish on the dying vine to which they have chosen to cling. They were not going to step to humble themselves. And so they resigned. What was Davidians now going to do? Everything had crashed. This resolution was officially filed and recognized by now the state. So all the members are notified, and I just put it here, 1962 resolution to dissolve the General Association of Davidian Seventh-day Adventists. This is a resolution, and this is what the government has and know. Now therefore, be it resolved that said General Association of Davidian Seventh-day Adventists be, and the same is hereby dissolved, and shall henceforth cease to exist. So not only did the Executive Council resign, the association itself was dissolved, brought to an end, and that the assets of the said association be liquidated and distributed to the members of the said association as herein named and set forth upon the terms and conditions in the manner herein set forth, in order to properly consummate such liquidation and distribution of net assets as aforesaid. Resolve that Tom Street of Waco, McLennan County, Texas, an attorney at law who has represented said association for a period of approximately 25 years and who is familiar with the practices, procedures, and properties of said association, be, and he is hereby appointed trustee for the purpose of consummating liquidation and distribution of aforesaid. So you see, not only did the Executive Council resign, the General Association of Davidian Seventh-day Adventists is liquidated. Finish. And these named individuals stuck with the General Association of Davidian Seventh-day Adventists, the Executive Council, and Florence led usurping of power, because Florence Outif was calling herself the chairman of the council. And these individuals went right down to the end. And as Dudley Gough stated, that people just scattered all over the place. So as we can see, Dudley Gough spoke of being at Mount Carmel during Brother Outif's time, and him getting trained by Brother Bingham, whom he likens to the Apostle Paul. Gough also spoke of the effects on him from listening to Brother Outif, antitypical Elijah, giving sermons in the chapel at Mount Carmel. So Brother Gough, in looking back, was recounting how he came in the message, his time at Mount Carmel, how he learned the message. And after Brother Outif died, his faith was hijacked by Florence Outif, and he just went straight off and down with the council.
And then got quite immersed, involved in things that were going on at Mount Carmel, and feeling, hey, that's where God wants me. And then they paired me up with M.J. Bingham, one of their leading theologians.
Yeah, I've read about him. He was major.
Really major in the early years there, particularly. So I went with him around the country.
So you're like a
Bible
Paul
studies.
and a Timothy or something.
Paul and Timothy, and I felt like it. I felt like I was Timothy, and I admired this man so much in his ability to give Bible studies. I learned to give Bible studies from him. So, and we had unbelievable
were you using
experiences.
charts like these back in those days?
Well, no, we weren't using this. We didn't have those back then. It was only after after 2 or 3 years.
But you were going and visiting.
Explaining Daniel and Revelation.
All of that,
going
yeah.
through these
And the
details.
shepherd's rod.
The shepherd's rod, but mostly me not explaining much, mostly just being there to help Brother Bingham. He had a bad foot.
Yeah.
And so he kind of needed someone with him quite a bit. And he was very tall, 6'4" or so, you know, and had a cane and everything. I about killed him a couple times. And here I am, a 19-year-old kid, you know, and I'll tell you some of the funny things that happened. But
so you were really getting convinced.
Oh, really?
More and
so.
more. This is it. This is the final message. We're very near.
We were up in Canada among the Ukrainians, and giving Bible studies there, but they were Adventists.
Yeah, see, Adventists are worldwide.
They're worldwide.
So when you returned then to Mount Carmel and you became more persuaded, more convinced, more committed, more into the spirit of what was going on, you were able to sit there and personally listen to Brother Hodeff.
Right.
What was that like to you at that time, looking back at
Well,
how you were
it
then?
isn't even just then. Probably where the feeling was the strongest before I ever left Mount Carmel to go to Cedar Lake. We didn't bring any of the timely greetings with us, but I would sit there in the chapel, and Brother Hodeff would come out with his Bible and open it up in whatever scripture he was going to be working from there, and his wife was seated in the front on the left-hand side.
Florence.
That was Florence there. We didn't have recorders then, but she was very good stenographer and typist and all this, but she was taking in shorthand every word he spoke. Then later on in the week, they would go ahead and transcribe that, edit it, and every other week they would put it into a timely greeting. So there'd be 2 messages in a timely greeting.
Okay.
And those were sent out to the field all over. But
So people all over that believed or were on the way to believe.
Yeah, and many that didn't, you know, if we had their addresses and all. They
We got a timely greeting.
Oh, it was a timely greeting. But I would sit there and listen to Brother Hodeff, and as a young, you know, here I am, 17 or so at that time, listening to him, I can't say I felt like I was in the presence of God. I mean, I wasn't looking at God. It wasn't God speaking necessarily. But what a privilege for me to be here to hear the words of God coming through his prophet, his latter-day prophet, the Elijah
of Malachi. Yeah.
of Malachi that precedes the second coming of Christ. I mean, I would just, and so I just drank in every word, you know. I mean, but it was the aura of it. It was the spiritual high, or whatever you might call it. But
it wasn't because he was, because you told us this, it wasn't because he was this flamboyant
oh, not at all.
orator or
He wasn't that.
It was more just opening the Bible.
This is right.
Going through.
Very calm.
So you see, here we have Dudley Goff speaking of what Mount Carmel was like in the time of Brother Hodeff, and what transpired too, prior to this last video that we looked at, of what transpired, the difference with Florence Hodeff. Total difference. So the timely truth educators in the 1950s was defending the shepherd's rod message to show Davidians that the shepherd rod message was not to be blamed. It was Florence and the council that was supposed to be blamed. And this is just something that we want to read. Not only was Florence doing a lot of things, but you have this man that popped up under the picture depicted on Florence there that was called Roden. Initially when Roden started to come out with his ideas and his doctrine, Brother Bingham thought that he was genuine too. And so they were thinking that Davidians that did not join up with Florence could join forces to warn all Davidians all over the world the perilous teachings of the council and Florence. This prediction that Ezekiel 9, the time of the Gentiles coming in, the time of trouble, and all their other false prediction was just false. But after a while, Davidians have to leave Roden too. Brother Bingham had to leave him alone because he went off real bad. Very bad. Now, this is an article from the Bashan Tidings, and we're at page 23, volume 21, number 1. It states, the educators defending the rod. In the midst of these competing, confusing voices, with their colorful catchphrases, bizarre names, the voice of the turtle, for example, the heady claims and counterclaims, a thoughtful, sober, and in-depth publication emerged as the voice of reason, Calm and Stability, titled The Timely Truth Educator. The first edition appeared in September 1957 and immediately took up the task of defending the rod against all opponents and claimants. The opening paragraph of the Educator summed up the issues at stake, perhaps Satan's first and most effective purpose to the end of the Educator thus became a clear voice, calling on divided Davidians to hold fast, to stay on track of the rod, and to reject speculation, fanaticism, and lukewarm adventurism. Some heeded this voice that urged Davidians to be 100% rod-only Davidians, but many did not and became involved with the various roots, shoots, and branches that were flourishing. Ironically, the most dangerous doctrinal speculator was the late V.T. Outiff's own wife, Florence Outiff. The educators continued to contend against Rhodeanism and the branch, and then they began to stand against the growing tide of prophetic speculation that Florence Outiff and her executive council were unleashing, and which would grow to a tidal wave that would eventually sweep her and her followers. So you see, you have Rhoden, and we call it Rhodeanism, and he started the branch, and there you had Florence, and the educator had to warn Davidians to stick to the message. So what finally happened to the new Carmel property after the executive council resigned and the association pretty much closed down? What happened?
What happened then there to New Mount Carmel? The Branch Davidians began, right, under the leadership of some other people, Rodens, and so
Another couple came in.
Yes,
There's
they came in,
continuity.
but see, I didn't want anything to do with any. Once I was gone, I didn't want anything to do with any of it. I heard a little bit on the news of the gunfight between David Koresh and George Roden and a little of this, but no, I want nothing to do with it. I didn't want anyone to know that I had been a Seventh-day Adventist.
You were embarrassed.
Yes, let alone a Davidian.
Right.
You know.
Right.
So I was totally separate and gone from this, another life. And the only exception that I made is when I married Penny, my wife Penny, because I went through a divorce with Carol.
Yeah.
When I married Penny, I felt it was not fair to her not to tell her of my past.
Of course. Yeah.
So I did tell her of my past. And I did Raven, that I'm married to now, after Penny died, after 22 years, told her that. But otherwise, telling no one. I was in the closet, in a sense.
But some people stayed.
Some people
clearly,
stayed at Mount
at the
Carmel.
prep.
Yeah.
And Perry Jones. And,
Yeah, Perry Jones stayed.
I don't know.
Oh, yeah, he did and all. But what I'm kind of leading to in this, I was immersing myself in another world, another life, that's all forgotten until
1993.
Until 93.
Who would have thought?
Who would
that
have thought?
Suddenly, your group was worldwide news.
This is right, yeah.
That's amazing.
And I saw that happen. I watched it day by day and all of this. But, and knowing Perry Jones, and friends I knew there,
That are dead. Yeah.
and I did nothing. And even now, I am ashamed of myself when I'm sitting next to two men who had nothing to do with the Davidians or Mount Carmel or anything else, had no history of it, but two men who then will step out and see what's happening there and try to do something about it, and went down to do it. And here I had a history, and I didn't do anything about it. I didn't try to. I even thought of maybe, but I said, what can I do? I can't. And I'm ashamed that I did nothing to try to stop that. And I feel, you guys, you picked up what I should have been doing when I had more justification for it and all. I mean, and so I'm in awe of you guys.
Well,
And what you did, and I put myself in the place like Peter. Peter was with Jesus all that time. And then he sees him taken, and he's standing in the courtyard hearing people saying, you're a part of him, and he totally denies it. He didn't try to do anything. And he went out and wept. I mean, it was a terrible blow to him. All that I had experienced with the Davidians beforehand, and now comes the real test. And I don't have the guts to make some effort in some way to help save the lives of those people there. And you guys did.
That's one reason we're doing this, and I think it'll end up being...
No. What the question was asked, what became of the new Carmel property after the association was just liquidated? Everything pretty much just came to an end. What happened? And what transpired is this. Ben Roden married Louis Irene Scott in 1937. 3 years later, the Rodens were baptized into the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Kilgore, Texas. The Rodens came to accept the teachings of the Shepherd Rod in 1946. For a short time in 1953, the Rodens and their 6 children lived at Old Mount Carmel Center. Roden was put in charge of the gardens and provided fresh produce. Following V.T. Houghton's unexpected death in 1955, Ben Roden sometime thereafter believed himself to be that he was endowed with prophetic gift. He called himself by his sign, the branch. Ben Roden started the observance of annual Jewish festivals such as Pentecost, Tabernacles, as well as Passover, etc., etc. And that's Ben Roden to the left and his wife, Louis, to the right. This is the Davidian Seventh-day Adventist Association, Bashan Hill, Exeter, Missouri. This was published March the 1st, 1993. After the dissolution of the General Association of Davidian Seventh-day Adventists, no further interest in the 77th tract of land. Consequently, Roden and his branch of followers essentially took possession of the property through squatters' rights, where they remain with intermittent factional strife. So see what happened. After they were liquidating New Mount Carmel, 77 acres was left, and Roden essentially went and took the article at this time, published in 1993, was looking back what transpired after Florence had left everything and had gone and left it to the lawyer, Tom Street, and 77 acres was left. The branch people went and lived and captured it with squatters' rights and remained there for a while. This is a Timely Truth Educator, volume 11, number 2, page 27, from September to December, and this was released 1967. When we found out pretty fast that the Rodens were imposters, Brother Bingham reflecting back when they found out about the Rodens, that they were not sincere to help stop the madness that Florence was going on with, but they themselves had ambition to just take over and push themselves forward and promote their own feast keeping and all kind of crazy ideas too. So it was said that they were found to be imposters themselves, and that their branch was as full of bugs as a haphid infested rose bush. We very quickly repudiated it publicly and did everything in our power to save everyone we could reach from it, and I've been doing so ever since. So what Brother Bingham was putting out to show people that Roden and their doctrine were dangerous, very extremely dangerous, at whatever cost in prestige and reputation, we humbled ourselves by the grace of God to confess and forsake our mistake. And the mistake Brother Bingham was talking about is to think that Roden was sincere and to join with him to try to push the truth. But he found after that Roden was not interested in that. By his God's grace and mercy, we walk in our integrity as did David. By the same precious tokens, we adjure you to do the same before you come to the hour too late. So this is Ben Roden, Lewis Roden, and George Roden, their son. We continue. This is Time the Truth Educator, Volume 11, Number 2. We at page 64 over to 65. The Branch Davidians sued for title, the title of the property. The cases were tried together, Waco Tribunal, Errol, Waco, Texas, and this was published in the public paper. Judge Bill Lodge entered a judgment Friday awarding receiver Tom Street possession of Mount Carmel Center near Elk and authorizing First National Bank to pay Street $20,000 rent out of an escrow fund on deposit there by the Roden. The judgment backs up the jury verdict, which says that Benjamin L. Roden and his followers, the Branch Seventh-day Adventist Association, have no right and must vacate the 77.86 acres of land with its 18 housing units, administration building, and church. The branch unit was one of the splinter organization of the General Association of Davidian Seventh-day Adventists, the parent unit, which legally dissolved and which made Street trustee to dispose of the asset. Another Judge Lodge judgment about a year ago upheld the dissolution and ordered the assets converted into cash so it could be distributed among all the followers who had contributed to the Second Tithe Fund, which was an old age retirement fund, the 10 Circuit Civil Appeals. And this is the court. And this tells you that the judge came in and said the deposit that Roden had made for the property in trying to get it, it should go towards rent. He should vacate the land. And the judge also said that all physical assets should be sold and the money distributed. But we know, after a while, they still didn't leave the property. Time of Truth Educator, Volume 12 through to 14, Number 1, page 30. And this is January 1968 to March 1970. And all these things the Time of Truth Educator was putting out to let it know that the doctrines of these people are very, very dangerous and fanatical. 8. The door of the vault was replaced and firmly welded back in place. So when Florence Houteff had moved to New Mount Carmel, Brother Houteff had his writings and stuff in a vault. And the vault was moved there. And once the Rodens went there and pretty much was at squatters' rights, they went into the vault. Because when the association was closed and the prophecy failed, people just scattered and left everything. Important documents, unfinished articles, and booklets. The weld ground off and polished, and the door repainted so no apparent sign of the job remained. Thus in brief is the story of how the Rodens got into the New Mount Carmel vault and stole V.T. Houteff manuscripts, including all the question and answer material which Brother Houteff had ready for the next answerer. This expose of the break-in into the New Mount Carmel vault, New Carmel vault, and of the theft of V.T. Houteff manuscripts and other spoils is another revelation of the forbidden morality. Rodens are no longer brethren in the faith. By their heretical teachings and unconscionable doings, they have made themselves worse than Eden made and publicans. Worse. And this was from 1968. And constantly these warnings was going out from Florence to now the Rodens. Later, Ben Roden traveled to Israel and established a small community of followers there prior to his death in 1978. After his death, his wife Lois took over. Lois said she had received a vision of the Holy Spirit describing it as a silver angel, shimmering in the night. It was a female. That's what she said. She convinced the branch group members that the Holy Spirit is a female, a view that Branch Davidians still hold today. George Roden, which is the son, was the presumed successor. However, after Vernon Howell, later known as David Koresh, arrived as a member, he became an active, aspiring leader. George Roden felt that his position of leadership was threatened and was deeply offended by Howell. Vernon Howell and his set of followers started paying the back taxes for the property and treating it as their own. Louis Roden eventually died of breast cancer on November 10, 1986. On November 3, 1983, Koresh and several of his followers, heavily armed, took on Roden in a power struggle. Roden, it was reported, had a submachine gun. A gun battle ensued for several minutes. Roden then fled the property with wounds to his hand and chest. Koresh's companions were found not guilty after a 2-week trial for attempted murder in a Waco court. A mistrial was eventually declared in the case. Their weapons, 5.223 caliber semi-automatic rifles, 2.2 caliber rifles, and 2 12-gauge shotguns, had been confiscated by the police, were later returned. The shootout was described by the New York Times as a foretelling of the violence. In October 1989, this is Roden now, Roden killed Wayman Dale Adair, which was age 56, in Odessa, Texas, by shooting him. Roden also struck him on the head with a hatchet. According to a newspaper report, Roden said in the shooting Wayman Dale Adair, he was defending himself from a hitman who was sent to kill him by some of the members of the branch organization. When put on trial for murder, Roden was found not guilty by reason of insanity and was confined to a mental hospital. He was later moved to another mental hospital in Big Springs, Texas. On December 8, 1989, Roden escaped from the Big Spring State Hospital but was found dead of a heart attack on the grounds of Big Spring State Hospital, where he was confined at the time. And from in the 1950s, the Time the Truth Educator was warning Davidians what bad things those devil-inspired false prophets were going to cause to happen. The name David Koresh was adopted by Vernon Howell to signify his self-proclaimed kingly messianic status, with David linking himself to the biblical King David, and Koresh, the Hebrew name for Cyrus the Great, essentially claiming himself to be a new Messiah, armed and ready for any war. Vernon Howell, or David Koresh, took control of the branch group in the 1980s. He eventually died on April 19, 1993, at the age of 33. Cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head and fire wounds sustained in the Waco siege. When the 1961 session for all faithful and true Davidians was called, Ben Roden and Louis Irene Roden were not present. They had already broken off or branched off from the Seventh-day Adventist Church and from the Davidian Seventh-day Adventist Association. They, the branch, were teaching false and dangerous ideologies, and those teachings they clung to the very end. Now what became of Florence Houteff herself? She went off and went into the world. Florence Houteff, this is her obituary. The obituary for Florence Marcella Aiken. That was her new name because she had gotten married after she left and went off in the world. Florence Aiken, age 89, died on September 14, 2008, exactly 10 years to the day after the death of her husband, Carl Aiken. Florence was born on May the 7th, 1919 in Eldaron, Wisconsin, to Eric and Sophia Delphi Hermanson. Her family had a general store there. They were business people. When Florence was still a baby, the family, together with her big brother, Carol, moved to Central California for a fresh start. Later they moved to Los Angeles area, where a little brother, Tom, was born. Her father worked in construction material companies and later in the dairy business. This was a time of the Great Depression, and to cope, the family moved many times. When Florence was a teenager, the family moved to Waco, Texas, and she pursued her education with many corresponding courses. She successfully completed the International Accounting course, a nursing course, a writing course, and other interests she had. She married Victor Houteff and joined him in establishing a religious printing and publishing organization that lasted until his death in 1955, after which she led the group. In 1961, it was decided to close the organization down, feeling that its mission had been accomplished. Florence then moved to San Jose and worked at the giant IBM plant as a secretary and accountant for 15 years. So this is what happened to her. After Mount Carmel was closed down and she left the message, she went off to work at IBM as a secretary and an accountant for 15 years. During that time, Florence married Carl Aiken, and their marriage lasted 35 years. She helped Carl in his real estate and investment projects. Her expertise in accounting and management experience helped all their projects. In 1988, Florence and Carl moved here to Vancouver to be near her family and friends. Her brother Tom predeceased her in 2000. Florence enjoyed traveling the world, visiting China, Bulgaria, Japan, Russia, England, France, and Greece via a cruise on the Mediterranean Sea. She was a very organized person. Her home and her work showed much pride of achievement. She loved her Bible and studied especially the prophecies of coming time. She recently wrote an article based on the prophecies of the book of Revelation. She hoped to share it with others. Her family will try to fulfill her wishes. Beside Bible study, Florence kept up with world events and read several informative publications each week. Recently, Florence suffered several falls in her retirement home. She injured herself seriously on the last fall. She bravely went through many days in the hospital, more time in a therapy ward, but it did not get better. She loved all the great care and gentleness the nursing staff gave her, but she suffered a massive stroke, and when hope was lost, she died in the embrace of a Ray Aiken hospice home. Florence told us she was ready to go. Her work was finished. She will be missed. When the 1961 session for all faithful and true Davidians was called, Florence Houteff was not present. And we do not know what state or condition Florence Houteff died in, and if she did repent of all that she had done. But that's what happened with Roden and Florence, and both of them chose not to be a part of the reorganization of the association in the 1961 session. And we stop here with part 3, and our next part will continue the reorganization of the association that took place in 1961. That will be our 4th part. Father in heaven, we want to thank you for all that we were able to cover today. Through Jesus Christ's name we pray. Amen. God bless you all.